considering stepping down?
Absolutely not. And you heard, I believe, directly from the campaign as well.
Any doubt in your mind President Biden has the vigor and mental capability to carry on with this office?
In my interactions with him, I have no doubt.
If I don't agree with you and your political views, if we're not in the same party, that's okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The White House is still in damage control. Let's check the president's agenda for this day. All hands on deck staff meeting, face-to-face with Democratic governors at the White House, and a vow to stay in the race for the presidency. All of this comes as concerns mount within the Democratic Party about whether the president can defeat former President Trump in November. Those concerns rising as a new post-debate CBS News poll shows a shift in key battleground states away from the president. That's where we start our coverage with Weijia Jiang at the White House and Nicole Killion on Capitol Hill. Weijia, this was not a typical day before 4th of July slumber day at the White House.
And Major, it is not going to be a typical holiday in any sense for President Biden because, as you mentioned, he is now scrambling for support of his own party. Even though he is the presumptive Democratic nominee, we are seeing more calls for him to resign from members of his own party on Capitol Hill. We know that donors have concerns. We know that supporters have concerns, leading to an article from the New York Times that said that President Biden was weighing whether to stay in the race or not. And Major, that prompted a very forceful response today from the White House pushing back and from President Biden himself, who had a phone call with campaign staffers in which he said, I want to quote this because it is very clear. He says, I am the nominee of the Democratic Party. No one is pushing me out. I'm not leaving. But he has a very busy few days ahead trying to convince people who have now questioned their support of him that they should continue to back him as the nominee. So no, Major, he is very busy in the coming days. And, you know, you almost look at every single one of the events he has on his schedule as a test to the American public to see if he can prove that the debate performance was just a one-off. He has campaign trips coming up. He has a major sit-down interview on television coming up. He has a press conference next week coming up. And so you can imagine the pressure that is on him right now.
And Weijia, fair to say this dominated today's White House briefing?
It did, Major. And of course, we asked whether there was the possibility that he is going to step down. And the press secretary told me that he's not even thinking about it. Take a listen. Is there anything, Karine, that would change his mind?
Look, I cannot lay out something that would change the president's mind. He has been very clear, and he's going to continue to build on the unprecedented record that he's been able to lay out for the American people. That's his focus right now.
Major, I also asked that given the groundswell of concerns from Democrats, from donors, from supporters, whether or not it was responsible of the president, whether he owed it to the American public to reflect about whether he should step down or stay in the race. And that is not even something she would entertain, saying that he is here to stay and he is focused on turning the page.
Weijia, thank you very much. Please stay with us. I want to bring in Nicole Killion now. Of course, this is a drama playing out at the White House, but Capitol Hill is not indifferent to this conversation. Many House Democrats have begun to weigh in. Nicole, what's the latest today?
Well, the latest is that at this hour, we know that House Democratic leaders are convening a call. That's Leader Jeffries, Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar, among others. And so this is a call that has no set agenda, we're told, and is strictly a leadership call. But of course, this comes as we have kind of heard this bubbling up from rank and file members, the aides, and others here on Capitol Hill expressing concern about the president's path forward and his viability. That being said, there are equally a number of members, too, who continue to stand by the president. But one thing is clear. There is a lot of frustration, certainly in the aftermath of this debate, how it could impact battleground polling numbers in critical down ballot district races. And so that's kind of what everyone is watching carefully and closely as this all plays out.
And Nicole, the viewers can see the CBS News polling results. They're not a massive shift, but a shift toward former President Trump. And also, I'm beginning to detect, as I listen to House Democrats talk about this, and I wonder if you're picking it up as well, that this is not just about the prospects of the Biden-Harris ticket. It is about the prospects of Senate Democrats, House Democrats, and the implications for the ballot nationwide, not just the president.
Well, absolutely. It's across the board. I mean, at the end of the day, most of these members, certainly all of them in the House, are having to run for re-election. And then, of course, a number of critical Senate races as well that could potentially affect the balance of power here in Congress. I do think it's worth noting, though, that we continue to see some members now, a second Democrat coming forward, Raul Grijalva of Arizona, who just a short time ago told the New York Times that he does believe that the president should leave the race, saying that if he is the candidate, I'm going to support him. But I think this is an opportunity to look elsewhere. So, of course, Grijalva coming out not long after Texas Democrat Lloyd Doggett. There is this big question of, is the dam going to break among Democrats? But again, as I mentioned, it's still a bit of a wait and see approach. We will see what comes out of this leadership call. There are some of the viewpoint, hey, let's see how the president does in his next couple of events. In this interview that is planned for the weekend, of course, members are expected to be back here in full, in both chambers. So there is, some sentiment among some members that maybe the president should come up to the Hill. Maybe he should, talk to members face to face. So there's a lot of, again, discussions behind closed doors. But that being said, the fact that we now have a second Democrat coming forward is worth noting.
Nicole Killian, thank you very much. Weege, I want to go back to you at the White House. Of course, this is not just about a campaign. It's also about continuing to keep the White House focused. And the chief of staff had an all-staff call about that. What does that tell us?
Well, it tells us that there are people here working in this White House that are impacted by this, of course, as you can imagine. And so that is why he told them to try to tune out the noise. He said, put your head down and do the work, but lift your head up and be proud of everything that this administration has accomplished, because there is a morale issue here as well, Major, as you can imagine. If your leader is undergoing the kind of scrutiny and calls for him to step aside, that's going to impact the entire staff. And so, he also said, reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm here to talk. It almost seemed like a therapy session for the people here. And I should say that just about in an hour and a half also, Major, the president is going to be hosting a group of Democratic governors, again, as we talk about trying to shore up that support from anywhere he can at this point.
Weege Jiang at the White House, Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. Thank you very, very much. What just a week ago seemed unimaginable is now quite imaginable. Democrats in the House and elsewhere, some of them openly questioning who their party's nominee should be. Straight ahead, Vermont Democratic Senator Peter Welch joins us. You are streaming America Decides.
If you know Joe Biden, you know him as a senator and as vice president, he's very sensitive to how people feel, right? And he's very aware of that.
What was once a whisper in Democratic circles over the president's ability to win re-election and serve a full second term is now something much different, and it's not very pleasant. Let's bring in Vermont Democratic Senator Peter Welch. Senator, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Simply put, do you want President Biden to be the Democratic nominee in 2024?
I want him to make that decision. What you have at the lead-in, that President Biden is sensitive to people. And more than that, he is sensitive to the needs of the country. And I am absolutely certain that President Biden is reviewing a situation in light of the very bad debate. And he's going to make a decision that is not about him, that is about what's best for our country. And we all know what the challenges are. But I have confidence that President Biden is going to make the right decision.
If he were to call you, Senator, and ask your advice, what would it be?
You know, I would defer to him. We love Joe Biden. Okay, he has in Vermont gave him the highest vote margin in the entire country. We love who he is. We love how he loves his country and loves his family. We love what he's done. He kept us from Trump. He's the only one who can do it. And all of that respect we have for what he's done and how he's done it over his decades in office, we're going to defer to him to make the decision. And it's very clear that the White House is very aware of the implications of what happened at that debate in the aftermath. I mean, President Biden did go in behind, and the age issue was the question. And instead of alleviating the concerns, Thursday night intensified the concerns. The president, I'm sure, is aware of that, as is his team. So I'm going to have confidence that the president will make the decision that's best for the country.
Senator, you say you love the president. That is a sentiment shared by many, many Democrats. Is this time a time for tough love?
Well, sure. I mean, the president is, I'm sure, hearing from people who are very close to him. And that would include friends and possibly family. And they're wrestling with the reality that there was a setback that was significant. It wasn't just a normal bad debate. There were questions that were raised about his physical ability. And that's just got to be acknowledged. I think the campaign initially made a mistake when a few of the campaign folks were dismissive of Democrats who were asking among themselves the same question that the president was asking. But bottom line here, the existential challenge for the Democratic Party is to protect the country from another Trump presidency. And that is far more important than the circumstances or the situation for any individual. So every single one of us, from the president to local Democratic board committee people, we all have to be asking what's best to help us guarantee that we will do our best to protect America from another Trump presidency. And no one is more concerned about that than Joe Biden.
In that light, I want to quote to you a fellow hardy New Englander, Jared Golden, a member of the House, an institution I know you respect and revere, from Maine, said yesterday in an op-ed, quote, "While I don't plan to vote for him, Donald Trump is going to win, and I'm okay with that."
Well, I'm not okay with that. I am not okay with that. We cannot have a Trump presidency, particularly in the light of that catastrophic Supreme Court ruling that overturned what has been the tradition in our country since it was founded, and that is that no person is above the law. Our whole revolution was to get rid of a king. And what the Supreme Court is saying is that the president is a king. And if they do things that are clearly illegal, but, quote, in their official capacity, it's okay. It's not okay. Trump thinks it's okay. So no, Jared, you're wrong. It is not okay to have Donald Trump back in the presidency.
You know as well as I do, Senator, that there is no mechanism for the Democratic National Committee to eject President Biden if he wants to be the nominee for the party. He's earned the delegates. He won the primaries. He won the caucuses. So there's not much time for this consideration to be given. And when the White House, as it did today, said the president's going to evaluate the next couple of days, you and I both know who's going to be the evaluator. Him. So isn't this decision already made?
He has the right. The decision is made. And the only one who can, because he's our nominee, all but ratified in Chicago. But he's the one who has the authority to make the decision, and I trust him that he'll make the right decision. You know, by the way, one of the things that's so terrific is all these names that are out there about people who might be contenders in the event that the president steps aside. They all want to run on the Biden program. Joe Biden has unified the Democratic Party from Bernie Sanders to Joe Manchin. You know, it's another reason why there's such immense affection and respect for President Biden, what he's done to unify this party. So he'll decide, and I am one who has real confidence that he'll make that decision assessing what's best for our country.
How would you evaluate this race if it were Kamala Harris leading the ticket as opposed to President Biden?
I'm not going to get into the speculation on this because, as I said, Major, we're unified. So you've got all these folks whose names are being mentioned, including the vice president, and they're going to be running on the Biden agenda. So this is a decision that then ultimately, if we get to that, delegates are going to have to make. And the various folks who are interested in this office are going to have to get out and present their goals and their aspirations. But, you know, she's terrific and has done a great job, a remarkable person.
Vermont Democratic Senator Peter Welch. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We and others in political journalism talk a fair amount about polling, but who are the people behind those polls? Our Anthony Salvanto traveled the country to speak directly to them. He'll join us to share what he found next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for hanging out with us. A new CBS Reports documentary reveals Americans' unfiltered, keep track of that word, it's going to come back, their unfiltered views on issues quite likely to shape the outcome of the 2024 election. Among those, state of American democracy and access and reachability of the American dream. Our polling director, Anthony Salvanto, you can see him right there. He went out into the field with our CBS Reports team to talk to the voters behind our very own CBS News surveys. Here's what a woman who immigrated to the U.S. as a child had to say about politics and how it can and often does influence human relationships.
If I don't agree with you and your political views, if we're not in the same party, that's okay. I don't think of that person as evil or bad or they're not going to be my friend or they're. It's just a political point of view that's different from mine.
Anthony Salvanto joins us now from our New York studio. The traveling man, Anthony Salvanto, what was it like? What did you encounter?
Hey there, Major. Yeah, you know, no screen here, right? No touch screen, no percentages. What we wanted to do was get out of the studio and go talk to the people who take the polls or others like them and ask, what got you to the opinion that you hold? And what I learned and what I'm excited to share with this is that, like the clip you just showed, Americans are willing to entertain different ideas, different complex ideas, and they're willing to have conversations even when they disagree. And don't let me sugarcoat this. We have definite disagreements here. But when you see how people got there and why they think what they think in their own words, you start to understand there's a real value to that listening and going deeper. And that's what we're going to bring here. You've heard someone who say, you know, it's not so much about the parties, it's about the elites. You're going to hear someone say, as a mom, they were concerned about what their kids were learning. You're going to hear somebody say they were worried because speaking out, they thought their neighbors or someone in their town might get mad and come after or take action against them because they weren't sure they could express their beliefs. All of those emotions are built in there, and it really reveals a lot about where we are as a country, Major.
And Anthony, I've watched the documentary. It's wonderful to see these voters express themselves on their terms. And one of the things that struck me is a reminder of my own encounters for now going on 30 years with voters. Issues come and go in Washington, and things rise and fall on an intensity scale here. New York picks up on it a certain degree, too. But voters deal with issues and remember them on their terms and on their timetable. And something that may be topical right now in Washington isn't necessarily topical to a voter when you encounter them. They may remember something and really care about something that we thought was 6 months ago, but to them, it's very current.
And it's really all in service of these larger ideas of, can we have a democracy, which means having a voice. That's one thing you'll hear common through all of this. It means getting the American dream, which means feeling like you're going to get some security, feeling like you can get ahead. All of the politics and all the back and forth in Washington is all, in their minds, in service of those things. Look, there's clearly big issues going on right now. And look, we'll hear from people who voiced concerns about Joe Biden's age, voiced concerns about what they think another Trump administration would mean for the country. But again, to your point, always in their terms, how they got there so that you can hear, understand. Some folks you'll agree with, some folks you won't, but you'll see how, what in their life experience led them to think that.
Anthony, very quickly, would you say you encountered more or less anxiety about the future than you expected?
Frankly, there's plenty of anxiety out there. I was heartened by the fact that people do not dislike each other as much as you might think from watching politics every day. But the fact is, there are issues and concerns out there, and at least it gives people a chance, us a chance to listen as people express them, Major.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you so very, very much. The half-hour documentary, America Unfiltered, I told you that word would come back, America Unfiltered, The Voices Behind the Polls, that airs tomorrow, July 4th at 5 p.m. Eastern. It is followed by an America Decides panel about what this all means for the election in November. Rallying the troops and reassuring the party that Biden is up for the job, our political panel takes a closer look at the current White House messaging, how muscular it is or isn't as concerns about the president's age continue to swirl. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Take this in. Both the White House and the Biden-Harris reelection campaign held all-staff meetings today. If you think that's normal the day before the 4th of July, think again. They're doing this because they're contending with what can only be described as rampant, barely controllable political fallout after last week's presidential debate. Sources tell us President Biden acknowledged in the last few days that this has been tough. He had his call with the campaign staff saying that he, quote, unequivocally is running for re-election. And he said, with some degree of confidence, he will defeat former President Trump. Tom Lobianco and Kadia Goba are here with me now at the table to dig into all of this. Tom is the co-founder and a national political reporter for 24 Site News. Kadia is a politics reporter for Semaphore. Great to have you here. I want to play you a soundbite from the Wayback Machine that goes all the way back to 2020, March of 2020 in Detroit. It's then candidate Joe Biden. Let's listen.
I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else. There's an entire generation of leaders you saw stand behind me. They are the future of this country.
Kadia, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else. There's an entire generation of leaders. What happened to that bridge?
You know, in addition to the, botched debate that happened the other day, I think there's a general consensus around that Joe Biden didn't do well. This is one of the concerns that donors in particular are bringing up, because they feel like, you know what, we've been contributing to a hardy group of younger Democrats, waiting to take their turn, and now we're at this point where this older gentleman just won't move out of the way. And he's flailing and could possibly lose the election. These are some of the comments I heard privately, and you'll probably start to hear them publicly.
And, Tom, it wasn't a pledge. Joe Biden never said, you can check the record, ladies and gentlemen, he never said, I'm going to be a one-term president. He never forswore the possibility of running for re-election. Let's be clear about that. But that language, view myself as a bridge, there's also, quotes the New York Times, a transitional figure. That's now coming back in the minds of some Democrats in a kind of haunting way, is it not?
And the way that Biden and his team, worked on the primary process this time around to ensure that everything went so perfectly for him. I mean, we all
moving South Carolina first.
Yeah. I mean, we remember the photos of Dean Phillips sitting so sad and alone up in New Hampshire. What that did was you didn't have a chance to test anybody out. I mean, this is why we're hearing all this talk right now about Kamala Harris could come forth. Maybe we need to see some more of her. It's interesting. You think back not too long ago to when Obama used to keep Biden underneath him, and a very standard practice in White Houses. But yeah, and as Kadia wrote in her piece just recently with this the donor freak out that's going on, people are casting about looking for talent, and we haven't seen it because he kept a lid on it for so long.
In these conversations among donors, Kadia, look, yes, they have some influence, but they know their influence is limited. The sitting president of the United States, the leader of the Democratic Party, he has all the delegates he needs. And yes, you can say, I'm not going to stroke you a check, But what implications does that have for a House Democrat or a Senate Democrat? And if you literally feel that Biden can't win, don't you want to be protective of those other Democrats down ballot? I mean, the money's going to flow. It's just, how do you get there?
Yeah, I think that's probably what donors are thinking about right now. Maybe removing a lot of patronage to Joe Biden and maybe settling in on trying to secure the House race of the House at this point. The Senate.
It's a narrow majority. Everyone knows that. It's on a razor's edge. And if you can win the House, then you have at least some institutional mechanism by which to challenge, if there is, a second term for a Trump presidency.
But I also want to point out that I think some donors didn't have, personal one-on-one contact with Joe Biden. So they were very shocked to see him on a debate stage like that and probably looking at political consultants like, well, what have you been doing with my money? Like, what has been transpiring around here?
Tom, any thoughts about that?
Well, the political industrial complex reigns supreme. It does.
And by that, you mean people who are built into this campaign, who are going to get paid by this campaign and have no incentive to question the campaign.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
That tight-knit group around him, longtime operatives, Nita Dunn, Ricchetti, Donilon.
Steve Ricchetti, yes.
Yeah.
Tom Donilon.
And look, I mean, if
Mike
we've been
Donilon,
talking about this.
Not Tom, Mike.
2 weeks ago, we would have been talking about it in terms of the loyal team he has had around him for forever. But this is flipped on its head now. I mean, this sounds to me like all the discussions that were happening after Access Hollywood in 2016 for the Republicans. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is like Trump-era level chaos for Democrats. And it is astounding to see. I mean, Biden, so much of this was predicated on Biden will not be the story. Trump will be the story. The guy convicted of 34 felonies will be the story. How could he not be the story? And we just found out.
And Kadia, I want to let you know, because producer just told me in my ear, a fundraising email from the Biden-Harris campaign just went out, and in it says, under the president's quotation, I'm running. Okay, there you go.
What's happening?
And let me just say this, that doesn't settle it, folks. Not for this weekend, at least. But doesn't it feel to you, Kadia, that this has to be buttoned up in no uncertain terms, no later than next Monday?
Oh, it has to be. I mean, the election is nearing. They just, as you pointed out, they don't really have a plan for an alternative. That's part of the issue here. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that donors are really persistent about wanting a change at the top of the ticket. Whether it happens is a whole different story. I imagine we'll see what members of Congress come out. I know 2 members of Congress have already come out and said that they want to replace Joe Biden. However, I think people are probably looking at the Schumers of the world or the Hakeem Jeffries or the Nancy Pelosi's of the world to see what they're going to do and how they'll move forward. If Democrats are known to stick together, I foresee nothing changing.
Tom, let's evaluate the perspective that the Trump campaign has on all this. It's been noted to me several times, well, the former president hasn't said much. He doesn't have to say anything.
Remarkable to see Donald Trump not saying anything. Now, he is tweeting or truthing or whatever it is, and he is putting out statements, but even those are cogent. I mean, we are not hearing about sharks and electrocution right now.
Right, except for the reposting of something calling for military tribunals yesterday and trials for Liz Cheney. That's not cogent. That's wacky stuff. Doesn't need to happen. Ought not to happen in a presidential campaign. I think everyone would agree. But nevertheless, for Republicans, this is just watch them writhe in agony.
Yeah. We had on the 24 Site podcast, we had Sean Spicer on, just published. And it was interesting because he said that he does not see this as a cakewalk right now for Trump, and that you still have to be worried about putting away Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Now, what's fascinating about that is that it does revert to the blue wall, the Rust Belt. A couple weeks ago, we'd been talking about Arizona, Nevada pushing down Hispanic, Latino communities down in the South. But in a way, and this gets into the whole Veep stakes calculation, when you do when you roll this out, I personally think, and this is my reporting, that this still, you don't see it until the week of the convention, maybe the Saturday before. Everything else is just a tease. But it does, the blue wall, the Rust Belt, 2016 replay.
Tom LoBianco, Kadia Goba, thanks so very much. First Lady campaigned in the battleground state of Michigan. While appearing at the opening of a campaign office in Traverse City, Joe Biden acknowledged growing concerns about the president's ability to serve.
Because there's a lot of talk out there, let me repeat what my husband has said plainly and clearly. Joe is the Democratic nominee, and he is going to beat Donald Trump just like he did in 2020.
Earlier in the day, the First Lady appeared in Middleville, Michigan, to highlight summer nutrition programs for children and visited a military-related summer camp. Just yesterday, she visited Pennsylvania to court Latino voters.
I think it would be unfair and inappropriate to try and diagnose something.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is sharing his thoughts about President Biden's debate performance. We'll have more from my interview with him next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Dr. Anthony Fauci is sharing lessons he's learned from a decades-long career in public health. I sat down with Dr. Fauci for my podcast, The Takeout, to discuss his new best-selling book, On Call, as well as President Biden's debate performance.
You write in the book, Dr. Fauci, about regular interactions with President Biden, and you talk about frequent phone calls you got from him, his level of curiosity, the depth of his understanding of the underlying issues related to COVID and everything else, his curiosity, the questions. Simple question. Did your interactions with the president in any way resemble what you saw in the debate performance last Thursday?
No, I mean, obviously not. I don't want to comment about what happened that night, but, to me, it just looked like a bad night because my interaction with him was what I describe in the book. And what happened even subsequent to what I described in the book after I got out, he's very probing in his questions, very analytical, very calm about things. When you go in to brief him, Major, you better really know your topic because he's going to ask you very relevant questions. And he's very reflective on things and just doesn't jump out with conclusions or anything, but is very analytic. So my interactions with him, I have to say, have been very, very positive and in every way.
Did you see the debate?
I did.
Did anything about that, what you saw, medically alarm you?
I can't say. I think it would be inappropriate to say that, Major, because when you're just looking at someone on a one-shot basis, you just don't know what could happen. Did he have a bad cold? Did he take an antihistamine to make him, groggy or what have you? We don't know what went on. And I think it would be unfair and inappropriate to try and diagnose something from just a 90-minute clip.
Any doubt in your mind President Biden has the vigor and mental capability to carry on with this office?
In my interactions with him, I have no doubt. And I can only speak in my own interactions with him.
Jerome Adams, who you talk about in your book, served with Surgeon General during the Trump administration, was on this program, said much the same things that you've said just recently about COVID vaccinations and the efforts. But he also said, look, there are things that still rub me the wrong way. And he remembers, and many of those who are sympathetic to former President Trump remember comments of which I'm going to communicate to you. I'm going to read you a headline, September 5th from Politico 2020. Harris says she wouldn't trust Trump on any vaccine released before the election. Jerome Adams said there was a partisan aspect even before the vaccine became available in the heat of that 2020 campaign that wasn't helpful, that politicized this whole idea. Do you have any disagreement with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think any politicization of that is unfortunate, regardless of where the politicization comes from, Major. I've always felt that way. We've got to make sure we just stick with the science and make recommendations purely based on public health principles and scientific principles and not politicize any aspect of this.
You talk in the book with some frequency about former President Trump's relentless optimism and his desire that people around him in this crisis sound optimistic. Impediment or advantage?
Impediment, because it was unrealistic. I mean, that's the thing. In the very beginning, when we, as part of the team, the coronavirus task force, which was led by Deb Burks, when we went to him and said, you know, we're having a tsunami of cases. So what we've got to do is we've got to really have physical distancing and have that 15-day flattening the curve and extend it to 30 days. He, to his credit, accepted that because he was hoping that, like influenza, and as I describe in the memoir, Major, he kept on confusing a bit COVID and influenza. He wanted it desperately to act like influenza, which means it peaks in the winter months and then come March and April, it'll go away. So he kept on saying it's going to disappear like magic. And I kept on telling him, we have no evidence it's going to disappear like magic. But he was looking at the economy and he was looking at the election cycle and he wanted it to go away. And when it didn't go away like magic, he started to say things that were scientifically not true.
Any advice you have for those in your profession about how to balance mental health, the internal emotions, and the obligations of the work?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I've told so many of my friends and colleagues who ask, I'm not exactly the poster child for a normal work-life balance, as my family often reminds me. But my advice to people in the medical profession, but in any profession that has a high degree of stress and tension, you've really got to take care of yourself, because if you wear yourself down, and you may wind up having the paradoxical effect of not doing your job as well as you can.
President Biden has awarded the Medal of Honor to 2 Union soldiers more than 160 years after they took part in a daring Civil War covert operation. President Biden awarded the medals this afternoon during a ceremony at the White House with descendants of Private Philip Shadrach and George Wilson. On April 12, 1862, the men drove a locomotive deep into Confederate territory, destroying railroad tracks and telegraph lines along the way. This mission became known as the Great Locomotive Chase. The men are said to have driven the train 87 miles north before being captured and executed by Confederate soldiers. We're still over 100 days away from the U.S. presidential election, but across the pond, it's Britain's turn to decide. A preview of tomorrow's vote in the U.K. is next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Voters in the United Kingdom won't be celebrating the 4th of July tomorrow. That's not new. What is new is the voters will be heading to the polls. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is fighting to keep Conservatives in power, but the Labour Party, led by Keir Starmer, is widely expected to win enough seats to claim a parliamentary majority. If that happens, it'll be the first time in 14 years the two parties will have switched spots in the House of Commons. Lilia Luciano joins us now from London. So, Lilia, I'm sure you saw it. I've seen it, a tweet or whatever we call it now from the Prime Minister. Stop the supermajority. Vote Conservative on 4th July. That sort of concedes the point, doesn't it? Majority already going to swamp the Tories, and all that's left is staving off a supermajority. Doesn't sound very optimistic.
It's not optimistic at all, Major. I mean, Sunak also said there's a fight in the underdog, that the game isn't over until the final whistle goes. Mel Stride, who's a pensions and labor minister, basically conceded, too, and this is before people even went out to vote. There's millions of people voting, and we're hearing that kind of messaging. But the reality is that the final polls, the major polls, say that Labour will win the largest majority, hear this, for any party since 1832. I mean, Conservatives are expected to lose 70% of the seats that they won 5 years ago. Back in 2019, they had 365 seats. They're projected to win just over 100 seats. Labour is projected to more than double the seats that they have out of a total of 650. Even some of the biggest names of the Conservative Party might lose their seats. So the prospects are not great for them. I mean, what I hear from people here and have been asking for the last couple of weeks that I've been around is, look, this is not even about Brexit. This is not even about the widening gap in inequality, not even about the economic shocks that people have undergone in the last 14 years that conservatives have been in power. This is about the scandals. There's been so many scandals leading up to having 5 different prime ministers in the last 8 years. And people, of course, are blaming the party that has remained in power for that time. There's also something that I find very interesting is that Keir Starmer has moved away from the left-wing socialist wing of his party, and found a great deal of success in moving towards the center, in appealing to people who are disenfranchised or disenamored or unenchanted, call it what you may, by the conservatives, and might have not gone for a party, for the Labour Party as it was under Jeremy Corbyn, which was very much further to the left. They call him a flip-flopper. They say he is not shiny and new, that he's not charismatic, but somehow he's been able to establish something that we've seen major, not just in politics in Europe or in Latin America or in the U.S., but something that you hear a lot of pundits talk about, and it's the need for somebody in the center to not allow or let the far fringes of either movement or either parties really get the loudspeaker. And of course, coming back to the U.S., it's something that Biden stood for. But at this time, we'll see what this all means for U.S. politics.
Lily, I want to pick up on that observation about Keir Starmer refashioning the image, at least in his light, of what the Labour Party stands for. To the degree he has defined it, what's the agenda?
I mean, what he has been trying to say is, look, we need to remove the people who've been in power. And so I think part of the strategy and part of the analysis has been, even though he represented the far left, and he was very much a champion of Corbyn when he led the Labour Party, he's changed that stance because I think what he calculated, the estimate is that all you need to do first, the first and foremost biggest priority, was to remove conservatives from power, which is interesting because in the rest of Europe, I mean, what has been gaining momentum and speed and galvanizing voters has been those far-right movements. I mean, you would expect that if the UK were to follow the footsteps of, say, France, as we saw in that first round of voting for their parliamentary elections, you see Marine Le Pen's party win so sweepingly, if that's even a term, but have such a sweeping victory, that might here translate to somebody closer to that far right, closer to Trump, here being Nigel Farage, who represents the Reformist Party, smaller party. They have no seats in the Parliament, in the House of Commons, but what they do have is a great deal of support, 15% support among voters. And so perhaps that might grow, but I do think that it's interesting to watch this election and see somebody who stood for something that might have been seen as far left, as more fringe, move to the center and say, look, we need to change things, and the way to change things is to change who has that majority in the House of Commons, who is in power, and in this case is somebody who's not regarded as a very exciting leader by people here by any stretch of the imagination, but somebody who would just change what they fear the most, which is things maintaining in that same status quo where you've had all of these scandal politically and economically and instability overall under the Conservative Party.
Lilia,
saying
very
that
quickly,
as a way because of the politics in the U.S. and all of these concerns about who, if not Biden, is there going to be a big a big contention or a big competition among other people? Well, in this case, it's not necessarily the most popular leader. It's just not the one that they don't want.
Lily Luciano in London, thanks so very much.
Thanks.
That does it for today. We will be back with a special July 4th edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.